The film opens with an elderly man on a bus. This man, James, lives in the countryside in a peaceful, cozy area. James exits the bus and enters his small, colorful house, greeted by his wife, Hilda. The couple was deeply in love, living quietly. Their conversations were filled with mutual respect and appreciation. Hilda was a homemaker and Jim a retired soldier. Upon James's arrival, Hilda notices he seems troubled and asks, "What's wrong, dear?" Jimmy replies, "I've been reading the papers all day. The news is bad, but we must stay informed about world powers' decisions. They affect us." He begins sharing political news. Hilda, less interested, asks what he'd like to eat. Jim answers, then returns to discussing politics, mentioning he read about a possible war. Hilda optimistically says, "Luckily, you're retired. They can't call you up. Even if war comes, we'll survive like we did before." We learn that they both lived through World War II. The couple sits at the table and Jim tunes the radio to hear the news. They broadcast that the Prime Minister warned of rapidly deteriorating global conditions. A war could break out in 2 or 3 days. Jim was scared, but felt lucky he got pamphlets from the library. He gave some to their son, Ron. One of these pamphlets was from the county council with war instructions. Top priority, build a shelter. Hilda asked Jim if he'd dig a shelter. Jim said, "No, dear, that's old-fashioned. We have modern methods now. We'll use doors and put cushions on them." Hilda worried about ruining the house and painting doors. But Jim convinced her and promised to repaint the doors after the war. Post-war, she let him build the shelter. Jim started the modern shelter as instructed. He put 3 doors on the wall and secured them. But there was a problem. The shelter needed to be at a 60-degree angle for best protection. He called Ron to check on him, Brill, and the baby. Then he told Ron about the shelter and asked how to set the doors at 60 degrees. Ron didn't take his dad seriously and thought he was joking. The father got a bit annoyed and said, "These are government instructions. If you're building a shelter or refuge, follow them." Ron laughed and sang part of "We'll all go together when we go." Jim, responding to the provocation, advised building a shelter. It's their duty to follow government wartime instructions. He asked him to stop laughing, be a responsible father, and protect his family. Ron sensed his father's seriousness and answered about the corner. He told him to get a protractor from the store, reminding him about building the shelter. When the call ended, he was complaining to Hilda about their son's recklessness. Hilda, upset, said he was once a responsible boy but changed since college due to bad influences. Their conversation about their son ended. Jim started informing Hilda about wars and missiles. Hilda recalled World War II memories when they were in Anderson shelters, garden bunkers used by the British for protection from air raids in World War II. The couple reminisced about their childhood in that shelter, feeling nostalgic about power outages and teacups. They said, "Oh, those were beautiful days." Jim returned to work on the shelter, reading they needed 2 weeks of supplies. Hilda noted to prepare 28 bottles of milk. Jim went to get bread, but it was sold out, so he bought some canned goods instead. He painted the windows white, as instructed. She says white paint protects from rumors. As usual, Hilda was obsessed with cleaning and organizing the house. She warned Jim not to dirty the curtains while painting windows. After finishing part of the shelter, Jim asked Hilda to try it. It was very cramped, which annoyed Jim. He told her, "What can we do? This shelter is built to specifications." He put food inside and reminded her they'd have to stay there for 2 weeks. Hilda understood and wondered how they'd cook. Hilda pondered how to clean and use the bathroom. Jim replied, "We'll use a bucket." Hilda reluctantly accepted, saying she couldn't possibly agree to this. Jim reminded her it's for emergencies. The government warned against leaving for 2 weeks. They started preparing water and food, everything recommended. Jim reread the pamphlets and found a strange contradiction between the government's advice to remove window items and the county council's suggestion to put white covers on windows. Hilda asked Jim who he thought would win in the The Americans responded by excelling in the use of nuclear weapons, and he began recounting the events that were unfolding from his perspective, which were America's victory, Russia's defeat, the end of communism, and the beginning of a free world. He then continued reading the pamphlet and found written, "Put national savings certificates, medical cards, and birth certificates in a box and leave them in a safe place." So Hilda prepared the box and put all the required papers in it. Hilda asked Jim, "Can we send a message to the Supreme Soviet leader saying, 'Sir, we the people of Britain are tired of the bombing and have had enough of it, just like with Hitler. So let us live in peace. Live your life and let us live ours. I hope you are well. Please do not drop any bombs on us. Sincerely, Mr. and Mrs. Bloggers." Jim praised her, saying she was smart, but the message might arrive late because the mail situation is bad these days. Jim continued reading the instructions and was surprised and puzzled by a line that read, "You must get into a paper bag before the bombing." The couple wondered what the purpose of this was. Jim suggested it was a preventative measure to protect against heat and radiation like white paint. During their discussion, an official government announcement was broadcast. The enemy's missile attack has begun on this country, with missiles estimated to arrive within 3 minutes. Jim tensed up and immediately called out, "Hilda!" Hilda! She was doing laundry and asked him to wait until she finished. Jim got angry, unlike his usual self. He yelled at Hilda and told her to get in the shelter quickly. Hilda was upset and asked him not to speak to her that way. Jim, still angry, forcefully pulled her into the shelter he built. Inside, Hilda worried about the cake in the oven burning. Suddenly, a massive explosion destroyed everything, animals, houses, trees, all living and non-living things. During the blast, Hilda kept thinking, "The cake will burn." We then see flashbacks of Hilda and Jim's relationship, from when they met to their wedding. The explosion ends and they survive. The couple embraces, relieved. Hilda wanted to leave the shelter and clean up, but Jim stopped her. He told her to stay put. The blast was over, but its effects lingered. They needed to remain inside for 2 weeks. Through the window, they saw the complete destruction outside. As morning came, Hilda could clearly see their damaged house. Distressed by the mess, she tried to clean, but Jim reminded her to follow the shelter instructions. He read from guidebooks about what to do while in the shelter, including ways to keep each other's spirits up with jokes and stories. They tried to pass time with puzzles and chats. As morning came, Hilda felt unwell. She had a headache and body aches. Jim said it's from the bomb, and tea might help. He found the water was off, calling it a wise government safety measure. Using stored water, he then found the power was out too. He said it's surely another safety measure. Luckily, they had a camping stove to make tea. They wanted news, but the radio and TV were off, so they waited for the paper, which Hilda noticed was late arriving. Jim said it's normal in emergencies, everything's delayed after the blast. The couple planned their life, thinking all was well. They wanted new things and to use insurance money to fix up their home. They stayed in for days, thinking the war was over as it was quiet and no more bombs fell. Hilda cleaned, fearing emergency services might see their messy house if they visited. Hilda and Jim's symptoms worsened, headaches, dizziness, fever, and chills. Jim thought it was fatigue from their new lifestyle. He expected recovery soon. Hilda hoped help would arrive quickly. She asked about using the basement. The couple had a large basement where they could hide and store supplies. Jim saw basement living as outdated despite science's progress. He worried about rheumatism from dampness, so he dismissed the idea. The couple resumed talking. Jim realized they were outside their shelter. He alerted Hilda to return, fearing harmful rumors might affect them. Hilda reassured Jim, saying nothing they sensed could harm them now. On day 2, they felt worse. Jim read the guide and admitted his mistake. It said to stay in the shelter for 48 hours, not 2 weeks. He asked her to walk with him in the garden for fresh air. They went out and saw fallen leaves and heard a dog barking. They felt sad, thinking it must be hungry. They kept walking and were shocked Hilda, amid ash and smoke, wondered about the bomb's ash. They warned Jim, he replied. It's hard to describe because it's something people can easily notice. I think it's like grey snow falling. Then they recalled village folks, the shopkeeper, milkman and mailman. They spoke as if certain they were still around. Smelling smoke, they thought it was barbecue, assuming villagers were having cookouts. The camera pans around their house, showing a bird fighting death and destroyed homes. Hilda gets sick for the 4th time. Jim says he's been sick too. He brings chairs to sit in the garden. Suddenly it rains. They collect rainwater. Jim says storing water will help them survive, when the longest reminder that they survived, and that's it. Jimmy gives her information from some people in Japan when a Hiroshima bomb landed on them. They died years later because of the effects of the bomb. Hilda said sure, they didn't take the safety measures. Zaina put us different from them. Jim agreed with her and prepared the food after Jim began to imagine. A huge Russian soldier entered their house with a machine gun and started to share scenarios with Hilda about what possible scenarios. It happens to them with the passage of time. All the water that they stored is finished and the milk is ruined because of the lack of availability. Electricity and illness showed on their faces and their features changed. See, after absorbing the loss of all sources of fluid nerve on Hilda, and as she says, he started to raise his hand on her, but soon he remedied. He got excited and apologized to her. Hilda offered him to eat candy and they shared it together. Then she went to relieve herself and saw a rat and screamed and was afraid. This is a scene that scares the average person. What do you think with a cleaning obsession like Hilda? So I was very touched. Jim calmed her down and noticed on her mouth a red color. I think it is Rouge. Hilda reminded him that she has not used any cosmetics for a while, and she saw her face on the mirrors, and I understood that her gums are bleeding, and she shared with the Jim if there was blood when she went to the bathroom in the morning. Jim said, I think it's normal for people our age. Hilda started crying from exhaustion. Jim comforted her, saying it's just bomb after effects. Once the emergency's over, we'll go to the hospital for treatment. But they got sicker, bedridden. Talking became difficult, faces pale, vision declining. Strange spots appeared on their bodies. They blamed it on eating canned food for so long. Hilda's hair began falling out, terrifying her. Jim reassured her, saying women don't go bald. Hilda stood and said to Jim, should we use those paper bags mentioned in the manual? Another bomb might fall while we sleep. Jim agreed. They got in the bags, deciding to stay until help arrived. They remained in the shelter, confident the government would save them. They prayed as the film ended. I think you all understood. Ron, their son, knew that if a nuclear bomb fell, survival was impossible. Even those who survived the blast die horribly. He used to sing, when we go, we will all go together. No one will be left behind to suffer a slow death. But the people of the countryside all died, and life ended in the places they once inhabited. The couple didn't seem to realize that surviving the bomb was impossible. Instructions often arrived to use paper bags as body bags. They were also told to put official documents in a safe place so the deceased could later be identified. The couple's hope and care made them endure long suffering alone. But at least they died believing the world was fine, and their son, his wife, and grandchild were living normal lives. The film has more details showing the relationship between this couple and their conversations throughout the movie, all of which had meaning. Even the cover shows the happy couple with an explosion behind them, signifying their failure to grasp reality. But I believe towards the end, Hilda started to realize that death would be their fate. I think this because she suggested they go inside.